So before we begin, just a recap of some of the things we've looked at in previous lessons. We've got 3 past paper exam questions that I would like you to have a go at. You just need to jot down the answers in your book or on paper. The command words have been highlighted in red. The blue highlighting just refers to key terms. So can you have a go at answering these questions? Please pause the video and then start again when you are done. Okay, welcome back. So let's have a look at where we are going to be getting our marks from. So question 1A, name the structures A and B, and this is referring to the diagram on the right hand side. So hopefully we have labelled structure A as the nucleus, where genetic information is stored and controls the activities of the cell. And for B, you might have put something slightly different. It depends on whether you can see where the line is ending, but it's actually ending on the cell membrane. So B is cell membrane. Now the cell membrane, which we've looked at last week, is what controls what goes in and out of the cell, and it's going to be very important in today's lesson of diffusion. B, structure C is a chloroplast. What is the function of a chloroplast? Now this is only worth 1 mark, so you just need to say the process that happens inside the chloroplast. So hopefully we have referred to photosynthesis. Now if you have said about making food or making glucose, you will still get the mark. Photosynthesis though would be the preferred answer. For C, the table gives one difference between a plant cell and an animal cell. Complete the table to give 2 more differences. So as you can see on the left hand side, you've got has chloroplasts for a plant cell. On the right hand side, animal cell, no chloroplasts. So hopefully underneath that, and it doesn't matter which way around you have this, underneath it we have got about the plant cell has a vacuole or permanent vacuole, and the animal cell does not have a vacuole or a permanent vacuole. The final one will be about the cell walls. So plant cells do have a cell wall, animal cells do not have a cell wall. So hopefully we were able to get 4 marks on that. If not, you might want to go back and look at the lesson on cells, which would have been the first one I did in week 1. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at today, what do we need to know? So we need to know how particles move in diffusion. So all of us need to be able to say what diffusion is, and perhaps suggest some of the different factors that affect the rate of diffusion. Some of us are going to be able to predict which way substances can move across a membrane. So if you have a higher concentration on one side compared to the other, which way those particles are going to move. And also looking and explaining why surface area affects the rate of diffusion. And some of us might be able to also say how it is that temperature and the concentration gradient, how that affects diffusion as well. Okay, as you can see on the animation of the purple dots, they're signifying particles. And at the start, the particles were all clumped together in the bottom left corner. And where all of them were clumped together, that is a high concentration. Over time, those particles started to spread out. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're using the word particles when talking about diffusion. We need to be talking about high concentration, where they're very close together. There's a lot of them close together. And low concentration, which is what you see now, where they are more spread out. Now, you don't need to write down what is about to come up, because there is a more simple sentence that you're going to have a go at on the next slide. So diffusion is a natural process that happens all around us, and in fact inside us as well. And there's a few that we're going to be looking at later that we do need to know for the specification of where diffusion happens inside our bodies and also in plants as well. It is simply where molecules spread out from each other. Now, particles move in a random fashion, so they are randomly moving and they're going from their high concentration to their low concentration. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video in a second, and I'd like you to have a go at putting the words that are in purple in the correct place in the sentence that's giving a definition for diffusion. Okay, so if you could pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully we've had a go at filling in the definition for diffusion, and hopefully we've got diffusion is the net movement of particles from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And this happens down something we call the concentration gradient. So the concentration gradient is just a gradient like you would do in maths, and it's going from high to low. Right, now one of the really important factors that determines how quickly diffusion happens is surface area. Now, surface area came up in your chemistry chapter where we're looking at chemical reactions and how quickly the rates of chemical reactions happen in different surface areas. So on the left-hand side, you can see shapes. They have the same volume, so the volume is what is inside it. So each section's got the same amount of volume, but they've been cut up. So I want you to think about which one would have the largest surface area out of those three options, which one would have the medium surface area, and which one would have the small surface area. Just going to give you 5 seconds to decide that. Okay, so hopefully we have got this. So the one that has not been cut up at all is just one cube. That will actually have the smallest surface area in comparison to its volume. The one in the middle will have the medium surface area because it has been cut into two. And you'll see that the one at the bottom, where it's been cut up again, will have the largest surface area. So if you take an object and want to increase its surface area, you just need to break it apart. You'll have the same volume, but you'll be increasing the surface area. Now, if you increase the surface area, the rate of diffusion will also increase. And that's because there's more or an increased area for the reactant particles diffuse across. So the smaller the pieces, the larger the surface area. So if it's smaller pieces and there's a larger surface area, it means that there will be more diffusion. And this is important in some of the structures or some of the adaptations that we have in our bodies. So we have maximum amount of diffusion. Now, example number 1 is the digestive system. Now, the digestive system will actually be one of the systems that we look at in a future chapter this year. And inside the digestive system, in the small intestines where the nutrients are absorbed, we've got these structures called villi. Now, these villi are tiny little projections coming out of the wall of the small intestine, and they greatly increase the surface area. So digestive food products move along the intestines, and they will diffuse into or through the villi into the capillaries in the center of the villi. Now that's really important because that's how we get the nutrients around our body. So when those nutrients such as glucose diffuse from the intestines into the bloodstream, they can be transported all around the body. Another important example inside our body is in the respiratory system. Now, respiration is something that we will look at in a future chapter. Please remember that breathing is going to be different to respiration. So respiration doesn't happen in the lungs. Respiration actually happens in all of your cells in the structures called mitochondria that we looked at in a previous lesson. And it's about getting the oxygen to all of those cells so that they are able to respire. Now, there are structures inside our lungs, little air sacs, that are called alveoli. So one alveolus, several alveoli. And it's here where gas exchange actually happens. So oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli into the red blood cells inside the blood, and carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the blood into the alveoli for us to breathe out. There is a huge surface area in our lungs, and this is purely because of the adaptation of having these alveoli, which greatly increase the surface area. Another really good example of diffusion that is happening inside some people's bodies is in the placenta. Now, the placenta is an organ that develops during the development of the baby, and it's where the nutrients and oxygens will diffuse across, go through the umbilical cord and go into the baby. Because obviously the developing baby is unable to eat and breathe, so it needs to get all of its nutrition, all of its oxygen from the mother. It'll be producing lots of waste products, so that needs to go through the umbilical cord, through the placenta, and back into the mother to dispose of. So the blood from the mother will have a much higher oxygen concentration, so oxygen being the particles, so they will diffuse from the mother's blood through the placenta into the fetal blood, or the blood of the fetus. And we've got a diagram at the bottom right that shows the umbilical cord and the blood network from the umbilical cord. In the middle, we've got the placenta, and then on the right hand side, we've got the mother's blood supply. Now, in next year's biology, you're going to be looking at the nervous system in quite a lot of detail, but one part of the nervous system, there's another good example of diffusion, is the part called the synapse. Now, the synapse is a junction that joins two nerves together. So when you have an electrical impulse traveling down your nerve cells or your neurons, it doesn't go from your brain all the way to the endpoint. There will be it will go from different nerves. It will pass that message on to the next nerve, and it does this through this synapse. So here is a diagram. The purple part is one neuron, the blue part is the next neuron, and when the electrical impulse gets to the end of the neuron, it releases a chemical message into this gap between those two neurons, and it's that gap that is called the synapse. That chemical message will diffuse across that gap and will actually trigger the next nerve or the next neuron to start the electrical impulse again. Now, one that is not inside our bodies, but is going to be in plants, is a structure called the stomata. Now, the stomata in plants most of them are underneath the leaf. So if you have a leaf out, on the underside of it there will be teeny tiny holes, and it's those holes that are called stomata. Surrounding the stomata you have guard cells, and they control the opening and closing of the stomata depending on conditions. There'll be more about stomata in photosynthesis. Because plants don't have lungs, most of their gas exchange is going to be happening through diffusion. So carbon dioxide diffuses into the plant through the stomata, and during photosynthesis the carbon dioxide is being used, so that decreases the concentration. So more carbon dioxide from outside will diffuse into the leaf. Okay, so a question for you. This is talking about one of the examples of diffusion. So I'd like you to have a go at using the idea of surface area. Describe how the alveoli are adapted to their function for gas exchange in the lungs. So there is one thing that we have spoken about, but can you see anything else that might increase that rate of diffusion? If you could pause the video and have a go at answering that. Okay, so hopefully we've had a go at describing how the alveoli is adapted to its function for gas exchange. There is the obvious one that we spoke about earlier, which is to do with surface area. So because of these structures on the alveoli, it greatly increases the amount of surface area available in the lungs for that diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Something that you might have thought of that we haven't spoken about, but is also a good factor, is that the alveoli walls are very, very thin. So it allows the oxygen to easily pass from inside the alveoli into the bloodstream. A third adaptation is this fantastic supply of blood provided by the capillaries that go around the alveoli, and that is taking that oxygen away straight away to keep that concentration gradient, to make sure that the oxygen from inside the lungs is diffusing into the bloodstream. Okay, so we've spoken about surface area. So a large surface area will increase the rate of diffusion, but there are a few other factors that affect diffusion. Now, please see Miss Corbett's videos on diffusion practicals, where she'll be looking at the effects of temperature in diffusion of potassium permanganate, but also looking at concentration gradients with a practical on starch, looking at how that breaks down and diffuses through a membrane. Now, on the diagram below, something that we can't show you in a practical is looking at the concentration differences. So as you can see on the diagram, on the left-hand side, there are far more particles in an area, so it has a higher concentration. On the right-hand side, there are less particles in an area, so it has a lower concentration. So the particles are going to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side through diffusion. It's going down a concentration gradient from high to low, down the concentration gradient. So the bigger the differences between those two concentrations, the greater the rate of diffusion. If you have even more particles on the left-hand side, they will diffuse quicker to the right-hand side. So the difference between concentrations will affect how quickly diffusion happens. Okay, so that is it from me on diffusion. As I say, please refer to the practicals being uploaded by Miss Corbett on diffusion. What we need to know from this lesson is what diffusion is, which is going to be that definition that we put down. So the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration down a concentration gradient. But we also need to be able to know some of the examples and explain some of the examples of diffusion happening. So good ones to remember that are going to come up in other chapters are going to be in the alveoli, in the digestive system, and also in plants through the stomata. I'd say those three are definitely good ones to make sure that you've got good notes on them so that you can refer to them when revising. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you are all well and continue to stay well. And I will speak to you soon in the next lesson, which is going to be on osmosis, a special type of diffusion.